Okay, let's look at this game where my friend said, felt like I played correctly. I tried not to make any mistakes. I wonder if I made some. The opponent resigned early. Too bad. I would have liked to see where it would have gone. So let's look a little bit at this game. I kind of looked at the move order. I have an idea what I want to talk about, but maybe there are other things that I have overlooked, and let's kind of have a cold approach to looking at what happened in this game. e4 is followed by e5. So far so good, very classical. Bishop to c4, I like it. It's a very normal, very principled move. And pawn to f6. So this is probably what we're going to spend most of the video talking about. The terribly bad move that is this pawn to f6, and literally about 1,000 different tactics can occur because of this move, and mostly it comes from the fact that it weakens this queen diagonal. So if you've talked chess with me for a while, you know now I really put a lot of emphasis on the fact that the f7 square is the weakest in black's starting position and is the target of a lot of attacks, usually, especially when bishop to c4 is played. And in this case, pushing the f pawn forward weakens it even more because it exposes the king. As we're going to see a little bit how we can take advantage of, I want to start by looking at the game. Knight f3 is not a bad idea at all. Maybe pause the video now and look at and answer me this. Knight can take on e5 later on. And it's a sacrifice, but knight will win big out of it. Can you imagine the following move and the pressure that is put? And in other words, why should black really try to either play knight to c6 or even d6 to a certain extent, even though I don't like this move? Why should white absolutely defend this? Queen to e7 is probably also okay. What does our friend decide to do? Black move to b6. So b6 usually means that you want to prepare a fianchetto of the bishop, putting the black light square bishop on a very strong diagonal, putting pressure on e4, putting pressure on g2 also in the future. So early castle. So this is typical, the type of mistakes that I see doing. Castling isn't bad. It's just not capitalizing on big weaknesses in the position. Already, you can see this diagonal here, and you should start thinking about how can I take advantage of it. This diagonal here has a bishop waiting to go. Like for instance, instead of castling, let's take a look at this move here. This move can be met either with knight. Okay, sorry. This move is actually threatening to take a rook, just to be clear. If you meet it with knight to c6, well, this knight is semi-pinned now. They don't have a good place to go. And on top of it, even later on, a trade could not be that big of a deal. It might even be advantageous, given that this double pawn and the exposed center might be an issue for black if they don't know how to deal with it. Now, don't go thinking double pawn is always a weakness. No. But it could be a weakness if you find a good use for them. But most importantly, if black, which is very likely, moves c6 to defend, and you retreat your bishop back, look at this dark square, this black knight. Doesn't have any easy square to develop to, so you're going to be expecting more pawn pushes, and all of a sudden your opponent is spending their time moving their pawns while keeping their minor pieces in the back rank. So these are very simple, obvious ways to pressure this diagonal. And I'm sure that as you develop more pieces, more creative and interesting ways will appear. So, and not to mention this knight to e5 move that we're going to talk about, that is actually devastating. So my point is, as there are holes here in this opponent defense and black is not playing a good defense at all, the move short castle is safe. It's good. It's definitely not a bad move, but it's not the most punishing either, and there are probably better moves that you could play. Bishop to a6. Let's think a bit about bishop to a6. What is happening here is that black is offering a trade of the bishops. And you should start thinking about, should I trade, yes or no? As white, what are your options? Either you capture the black bishop with the high probability of being recaptured right afterwards by the knight, or you move away the bishop, or you defend the bishop. No, sorry. So how would you make the decision? This is how I think about it. And again, I'm not the best player, but this is what seems very obvious to me. If I move, the rook is going to get captured. But I can move to a place where I threaten to capture the rook as well. Let's look at this position. Here, here, here. And we'll probably leave. Say something like this, maybe. And now who's better off? Well, it's not very obvious to me. Those two bishops are relatively strong. This bishop still has a safe square. This bishop can still be pressured here. At the same time, this is a serious threat. This is pretty central. It's going to take some calculation to decide who benefited from this move order. On the other hand, we could even defend this pawn with, for instance, the move d3. And now these bishops are still looking at each other. This one is still controlling a pretty good diagonal, while the other is pressuring another strong diagonal, kind of putting pressure on the pawn. This has the advantage of creating this pawn structure with the bishop outside, which is almost often a good thing. It's often a good thing. So again, it's not very clear who's getting the advantage here or not. On the other hand, let's look at the exchange variation. Who's better off? We have, on one hand, black has moved the knight out far from the center, pushed pawns a little aimlessly, while white has moved the pawn in the center, developed a minor piece towards the center, castled, and achieved steady opening principles. In this position, to me, white is clearly better than black. Now, does it mean that this is the best move? Does it mean that a computer would decide to trade? I don't know. But does it mean that someone with my ability to calculate see that one of the three options has a clear advantage that I can see, that I can taste, that I can feel? I can see things in this position that make me go, okay, white is clearly superior. Then I always try to go for these positions, these decisions. The decision that makes me think, at least it's not a mistake. Maybe it's not the best choices, the best choice or outcome, but this is clearly better for me, and these are the type of things where you really want to think about them. Now in this game, push d3. Again, it might be that d3 was the best move. This pawn formation is really strong. The bishop is outside the pawn formation. This bishop is not immediately putting pressure here. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I'm not a computer. I haven't looked at the computer analysis for these things yet. Okay. Bishop to c5. I cannot stop looking at this. Like, this is something that we should probably be looking into taking advantage of. Not to mention, again, we're going to talk about knight to e5 later. I want to see. So, do you offer a trade? Is it obvious who wants to trade, who doesn't? Again, in these positions, it's a bit difficult to know. Now, at this stage, I feel like there are different types of players. There are the offensive-minded players that will look for trades. There are the defensive-minded players that will look for protecting whatever's available. I'm not even sure that this was necessary, to be honest, because this is not a real threat yet. The knight is still here. The pawn is not moving forward. I would be thinking about developing more calm manner. Knight might be a problem for this knight. Not sure. Would be interested. The bishops look at each other. He chooses to trade this. So this looks like, hey, I doubled the pawn, and double pawns have a bad reputation. And I kind of messed with this structure in front of the king, but the truth is, also activated this rook. All of a sudden, rooks really look for files that have no pawns. They love files that have no pawns. And now, in this file, it's called semi-open. White doesn't have any pawn anymore, and the rook is already here. Strong control can appear out of it. So I'm not convinced that the trade was to black's favor. The queen is here. The queen is probably going to look for this move here. Similar to what the bishop was doing earlier, having two diagonal snipers next to each other is not a bad idea, and not to mention the double threat that would be here. Activating the knight is not a bad thing either. This knight wants to jump on d5. It's very well protected on d5. And you can put pressure on this and on the infamous c7 square where it can fork. Good stuff. There's still the possibility of exchange, which I still think would have probably been better, even though... Is it still clearly better for white? I think so. I think this diagonal is still the big weakness in black's position. Instead, we develop towards the center. So here's the threat. The threat is this: there's a pawn that is hanging undefended, and then it's not just this. It's see, like once here, white decides to defend with rook to e1, but at this stage, there's this little tactic here where after this exchange, white is down a pawn. And quite frankly, with these bishops able to come into play soon, it's not that obvious to me that white still has a big advantage. I think white has a small lead and needs to start doing something about this. But black is actually solidifying itself a little bit in the center. I don't know. Interesting. In any case, black did not opt to go for this trade. Instead, decided to develop a knight. Hoping maybe to start castling. Maybe they should really start thinking about castling. But this knight was defending something very well spotted by white. Get the... Okay, you move your defender. I'm getting the whatever it was defending. This move is a bit... weird. What is it trying to defend here? Like probably preventing the bishop from coming to b7, but what was the bishop gonna do in b7 anyway? It's not like it's gonna achieve anything. Poor move by black. Okay, push on the center to attack the queen. I don't know about it. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it seems to me that this was probably a mistake. So let's say I take. Now I'm threatening here. Take back. and this. And now black... Oh, no, there was also this knight. No, never mind. So it was a good move. Good moment to push in the center, d4. Black has to react to this. Moves the queen away. Probably the best thing to do, because taking would have been problematic. Same idea. And here the bishop comes back in b5. The only thing I like about it is that this bishop is actually protected right now and is a strong X-ray on the king. Hopefully it will be useful in the future. Activate the knight. Knight on e7. This knight here should probably be captured. Instead, the rook moves, and when the knight moved to c7 with a check, black resigned. Now I'm not too sure why black resigned, mostly because this was a free knight, and probably black is slowly going back, itching back, getting back in the game. It's not obvious to me who is better. I think black badly needs to castle fast. They cannot castle long anymore. I think I would give white a little advantage, simply because of this diagonal again. So okay, if I were to say to my friend, did you make any mistakes? I would say not particularly, but there were plenty of better moves you could have done. Well, ironically, this knight to c7 is the one glaring mistake where you gave away a knight for free. And then instead of taking your knight, your opponent decided, oh, this is too strong, I resign. No clue why, but these things happen. Now let's look a little bit about this amazing move. In general, as soon as your opponent pushes f7, something should just start ringing in your ear saying it's time to attack. And let's look at this position. So here, this is something you will find very often, even if the bishop is still at its place and g3 is still at its place, you can find similar positions here. What happens if you capture? This is a free pawn. And this is literally a free pawn, and the worst thing that black can do in this position is capture you back. Can you imagine, can you pause and look at what will be the best follow-up move for black for white in this position? Pause. I'm going to count, give you a warning. Think about it. It's a fun position. 3, 2, 1. Queen to h5. Queen to h5 check is pure devastation. At this stage, what are black's options? Black has only 2 legal moves. One of them loses immediately, the other one loses soon. The first option, the one that loses immediately, is knight to e7, king to e7. After king to e7, you have queen to e5, checkmate. That was it. That would have been an immediate checkmate. The other one, deciding that, hey, I cannot move this because it's a checkmate in one, is to play g6. And it should remind you of the wayward queen attack that we have looked at in the past. And after e5 check, God forbid if something like this happens, then queen to h8, take the rook. This is pinned, and I don't know how you're going to defend it, but it's going to be a nightmare. So again, see these positions? Like there's this happening soon. With this, so you need to find a way to deal with it. This is one of the examples that we've looked at it. Obviously, at this stage, after you capture on e5, black doesn't have to recapture, but this is coming still. and let's say black played something like this, and you were to give a check here, this is still pretty dangerous, as the defense with g6 is not possible, given that this is here, this is a threat, this is a threat, and if you think that you can get rid of both threats with pawn to g6, pretty sure that this is also check. It's not checkmate yet. It's not checkmate yet, but with f7, now you're pushing your king forward, and I mean, you can imagine all the horrible things that are gonna transpire after this. How would I go from here? I'm not sure, but it's gonna be a fun one. Yeah, honestly, from here I don't need to actually do anything. I can just start playing d4 and putting pressure on the king, challenging the king to do something. And this is all this I'm really gonna have to deal with. The point is, once the king is on the 5th rank with all your minor pieces behind it, and even the major pieces, when your king is leading the charge, the game is gonna be won ultimately. So this could have happened. Another thing could have been protected with the queen. Maybe a better idea. It's also the same thing as check. Moving it is a nightmare because of the fork. And instead of moving, if you interpose, kind of the same thing happens with this, with an X-ray, with this. So if you don't want to lose your queen, you could do something like this, but it's not really going to help, because after check, the same thing can happen here, and check with protection. So as you can see, this queen on h5 completely destroys this move to f1.